mein Bart verkoltram, bei Hallelujah by Yom Hashvi, Melachto Asherasa, Eshbos by Yom Hashvi, Mikol Melachto Asherasa, by Verk Elohim as Yom Hashvi, Yukadesho Toki Voshan, Ikol Melachto Asherbara, Elohim Lasos, Brachtan Nine, Melachman Break Gaffin.
So we've just done a census and we're waiting for the results of that. There are about 2,000 Jewish people in the entire country, of which probably 3/4 at least live in Dublin. Demographic-wise, so we have a big hole in the community. There's lots of young people, like young children at the moment, and there are, you'd once you go 60 and over, and then in the middle there's a big gap. There is not a lot of young couples, university-age students, so that's where we're kind of missing. But hopefully that will grow as the young families, as the kids go through the school. That will improve.
My mother's father arrived before the turn of the century, the 20th century, to escape the pogroms in Russia. My grandmother came here from Edinburgh as a bride, and my other grandmother came to Cork for the same reason as my grandfather came from Russia. She came from Russia at 3 months old to Cork, and she was the start of a family of 12, and they lived in Cork. And my other grandfather, to be absolutely honest, I presume he came from Russia, but I really don't know.
We came to Ireland in the year 2000, summer of 2000, so 16 years now coming up. And when we originally came as a kind of youth rabbi, and it was looking after all the students and kids and making sure their programs, and basically to just build interest with the youth. And then it must be maybe 6 years now that the chief rabbi left, and then I took over as rabbi of the synagogue.
My grandmother, on my mother's side, she came from Lithuania in she was about 4 or 5, and it was the end of the 19th century she came to escape persecution, I suppose. Life wasn't very good in those days. And also, there were always family members here who looked after them when they came.
Well, the company that I work with, it's a family business called Woodworkers. We're situated in Dublin, near the city centre, and we're like merchants, timber merchants, a lumber yard. We sell to the public and to professionals. The business was started initially as a furniture manufacturing company by my grandfather, who in fact came from Poland, lived in London, and in 1928 came to Ireland. My dad at the time was 12 years old. He was one of 12 in a family, 6 boys, 6 girls. So their dad was a master craftsman in furniture making, and of his sons, 4 of the 6 actually went into the trade and learnt the trade. But in 1946, along with his brothers and his father, they formed a company called L. Malofsky and Sons, which became known as a furniture manufacturing company in Dublin, run by the Malofsky family. That's the business that I felt I wanted to take on as a challenge, and when I left school I became involved with the company, and that's where I still am today, 38 years later, working in Woodworkers, which I'm very proud of because of its history and because it's still in family ownership.
When my father was in his late teens, early 20s, someone he worked with put him forward to join a tennis club, and he got turned down. It was someone he worked with, and she didn't tell him till about 30 years later. Not only was he turned down, but she was made leave the club because she had proposed a Jewish, this would have been the 30s and the 40s, early 40s. And then in the 50s, someone my father knew from work wanted him to join his golf club. And my father said, don't propose me, I won't get in. And this guy said, of course you will, you'll get in. and he proposed him, and he was turned down. And in fact, the person who turned him down was the local doctor who didn't want a Jew in his club. So there was a Jewish sports club, a Jewish golf club, and Jewish rugby team, soccer team, tennis team. Yeah, it was good. When I was growing up, it was quite active, and it was where we'd go every day.
There used to be a plethora of Jewish butcher shops. There was poultry, specifically poultry shops. There was grocery shops, a whole street of Jewish shops, and there was a Jewish haberdashery, Jewish-owned haberdashery. It was just a different world. It was almost like stepping back into time, if you like. Now we don't have the luxury of that. First of all, we don't have the community to support it, and these people have died out, and we're very lucky in that one of the major supermarket chains has designated an area that is kosher, and they import our meat. It's Irish meat that's butchered in England and comes back in here. But we're very lucky. Compared to other places, it's very easy.
Well, I grew up in England, and you know, where the anti-Semitism was quite severe. So you're talking about, you know, cars stopping and thugs getting out and hitting the Jewish students and stuff. It was pretty horrible. There was even a neighbour of mine. He wasn't Jewish. He was, you know, he had a glass bottle smashed in his face one night because they thought he looked Jewish. So I grew up kind of with lots of anti-Semitism. And then I went to different countries. I was in Canada, I was in the States, I was in New Zealand, I was in Australia, different places, and it was much less in most of those places. Ireland, I think, has been the least, you know, I've been here, as I say, like almost 16 years and hardly any overt anti-Semitism.
I suppose it's not so much overt anti-Semitism, it's more like, you know, comments or remarks and stuff. And not even to your face, you know, you would hear people say things. So generally speaking, no. In school, there was always an element there who, they wouldn't say anything to your face, but they'd say it behind your back and you would hear things, which, you know, that wasn't very pleasant. Generally speaking, I think because there's not that many Jews anymore, there's a lot more Muslims and there's a lot more ethnic minorities that were never before. They're generally more of a target for racism or racist stuff. But I will say there is still a lot of misconceptions about Jews in this country with regard to money and, you know, things like that.
Being Jewish here in Ireland isn't such a big problem because there's no really overt anti-Semitism, and I don't think that I've ever come across a situation where, because of the fact that I'm Jewish, people treat me any differently. In fact, most people in Ireland admire the Jewish community and feel very positive towards the Jewish people.
I have never in my life, and I've had a long life, suffered any anti-Semitism. I am aware that there is some anti-Semitism, a lot of it latent. Not everybody likes us, but we don't like everybody either.
Right now there aren't so many businesses run by Jewish families because the community has dwindled in numbers, and those Irish families who would have been in business many years ago, some of whom have either retired and they're either living in Dublin as retired people, or they've left the community. But not many young people, unfortunately, with young families have stayed.
So my sister Dahlia, she lives in London, and she thinks I'm crazy bringing my kids up here where the community is so small, like socially, for the kids. I think it's good that they have Jewish friends and non-Jewish friends, and I like them to see everybody as equal. I don't like to differentiate between. So in terms of them marrying in, obviously that'd be great, but for me it's more important that they're happy, and whatever they choose to make them happy is what's important to me. There's a huge Israeli presence here at the moment. Families come over to work with Intel, so that keeps the Jewish numbers up, but then it's transient, like they go. And I find that difficult because Lily made a really good friend last year.
Yeah, and she left forever. And she might be visiting.
Yeah.
50%.
Okay.
Jews left because they wanted more religious communities, or they wanted to make a living, or they wanted their kids to grow up in a different environment, or they were Zionists and they went to Israel, or numerous reasons. And then things got good in Ireland and everybody stayed, and then they got really good, and that had a kind of a negative effect, because suddenly everyone was able to sell their house for lots of money, and they realized that they could relocate to different communities and have lots of disposable income. So, lots of people just they sold their house for $500,000 or $1 million, and they just upped, and then they went to Manchester and somewhere, and they were able to, have all the Jewish facilities of the big Jewish schools, the restaurants and all that stuff, and have a nice house and a nice car, the trappings. So it had a really bad effect on the community. Even though it was great for Ireland, everyone was making money, it had a bad effect that lots of people left and that they sold and left. Now what's happening is that's stopped. The people that are leaving now are the older people that are leaving to live, with their grandchildren. They want to have more time with their grandchildren. They're leaving, but lots of young people are moving here for all the high-tech companies and stuff. So some leave, some come, some arrive.
In terms of bringing up a family in a diminishing community, there's no right answer. I mean, you can move to England and your children can move to Australia. You can move to Australia and children can move to England. You can move to England and your children can move back to Ireland. So this concept of having to move for your family, I don't necessarily agree with it, because, you're making a lot of sacrifices based on something that you don't know is going to happen in the long term.
It goes back quite a long way. The primary school is actually about 20 years older than the secondary school, so we're talking around 80 years for the primary school, and the secondary was founded 61 years ago. They had a big celebration last year for their 60th. And it was founded mainly because there was no Jewish schooling at that time, no Jewish national school, which means primary school. And while the wider community was quite welcoming of Jewish students, there were issues because they were all Christian schools, and so there were issues with observance and Bible teaching and religion and things like that. So it was felt that the community really needed to set up its own school. When my husband went to Stratford, and he went all the way through the school from infants through the end of 6th year, it was an entirely Jewish population, and a few years after he left, at that point, that was about also the mid to late 1980s, when there was a huge exodus from the community here. And we just didn't have the numbers to keep the school open, so the decision was taken at that time to open the school to non-Jewish students, with the understanding given to the non-Jewish families that the school would still maintain its Jewish ethos. That's one of the things which I believe really attracts a lot of the non-Jewish families, that they like the ethos of the school. They like the fact that it's a small school and that there is no requirement on the non-Jewish students to take part in the Jewish studies.
Yeah, they go to the Jewish school, Stratford National, and Jacob's in 2nd year in Stratford College. All very positive.
Yeah.
There's one other Jewish guy in his year, but in the main, mostly non-Jewish. In the main, the community is a dying community, and where children have set up families and married in England, the parents who are still here are leaving and going over there. So we're probably the last ones standing.